It's no surprise the new Ducati Panigale V4 performs well on the racetrack, but what about on public roads? Can 216 horsepower still be used in a reasonable way on the street? I wanted to find out more, so I took a day to check it out on the road and also did an extensive test on the racetrack. And what came out of all that? Well, you'll see now. Yeah, today's superbikes are extremely optimized for track use, and honestly, that's no surprise. Manufacturers try to offer the best possible base for active race teams, especially since regulations don't allow for too many changes. So having a really solid starting point is a huge advantage. But how do all these advancements and optimizations behave when you're out on the road? Since many of you are probably going to be riding a bike like this on public roads, that's a totally valid question, and it's one we're going to dig into now. Ducati gave the Panigale V4 S, like the one we've got here, an update. The winglets up front have been revised a bit for better effectiveness. That means the current aerodynamic elements now reduce drag by about 4% compared to the previous version. That's especially helpful when you're going for top speed, where aerodynamic drag plays a major role. The shape of the tank has also been tweaked a bit to give you more support with your knees against it. The foot peg position has changed too. They've moved the foot peg slightly inward. That gives you more lean angle clearance with the same peg height, or it lets you lower the pegs a little without sacrificing lean angle compared to the previous model. That really makes a noticeable difference. And when I sit on it, you can immediately feel and see how narrow the bike is overall. You sit in really tight, you don't have to spread your legs far around a bulky engine. That's where the V4 layout is a real advantage. The foot pegs are placed in a sporty way, but the knee angle is still okay. That's actually quite beneficial for road riding and not just an uncompromising racetrack setup. Same goes for the rider triangle up front. I think they really nailed it. There's still a decent amount of space between you and the handlebars. So even if you're a taller rider, it's not cramped. It actually feels quite natural. The distance between your knees and elbows is also well thought out. The engine also got some updates, not mechanically, but more in terms of control and the surrounding components. The engine now complies with the Euro 5 Plus emission standard while still delivering 216 horsepower and 120 Newton meters of torque. Those are the core figures of the engine. And honestly, it's pretty amazing that despite the Euro 5 Plus hurdles, which are pretty tough to clear these days, they're still able to produce this kind of power. The engine still features a counter-rotating crankshaft just like its predecessor. And that's especially beneficial when it comes to putting power down to the ground. Because let's be real, 216 horsepower isn't something you just whack open at any moment, especially not in the lower gears. That's where this reverse rotating crankshaft really comes into play. The forces from the pistons and the rotating assembly don't push backwards, they actually push forward. And the result is that the front end stays planted more effectively, allowing more drive out of corners. Now, when it comes to the swing arm, that's probably the most visually obvious change on the new Panigale. They really reworked it heavily. And yeah, let's stay on the swing arm for a moment. It's clearly been massively revised. Unfortunately, they've moved away from the beloved single-sided swing arm. That's something they had to let go of to meet the new demands, especially in combination with the latest tire technology. They needed to strike a balance between flex and lightweight construction. When you're leaned over in a corner, the whole chassis is subject to different loads. The suspension alone can't absorb all the bumps. When you hit a bump while leaned over, the front tire hits it first, and the suspension can't really do much at that angle. Instead, the entire chassis needs to flex to absorb the impact. If you had a completely rigid frame and swing arm, the tire wouldn't be able to follow the road surface properly. After the bump, once the tire loses ground contact, it would lose grip and slide out. And that's exactly where this engineered flex comes in. The idea is to let the bike twist just enough so the tires can follow surface irregularities even at extreme lean angles. The swing arm, as I said, plays a big role in that. They really reduced the stiffness and shaved off 2.7 kilos in the process. The chassis follows the same direction, though calling it a chassis is almost generous because in the current Panigale, there's really not much of a traditional frame left. What we have now is a monocoque design that connects from the steering head down to the engine and transfers all forces through the engine and into the swing arm. So we no longer have a full frame, just this monocoque structure. And this monocoque, you have to imagine, weighs just under 4 kilos. That's an incredible opportunity to reduce overall weight. And again, they've built in a bit more compliance here too to improve rideability. The brakes also got an update. Once again, Brembo went all in. Over the past few years, they've continued to refine their calipers, and we've now got their new high pure calipers on this bike. These offer even better heat dissipation and are a bit lighter too. The main goal, of course, is to keep the brake system's temperature in check, especially during hot laps on the track. And with better and more consistent heat management, you get more consistent performance. That's a real benefit of the new setup. And speaking of the brakes, this is kind of crossing over into electronics, but one new feature worth mentioning is the combined braking system. This new braking system called ECBS helps the rider operate both brakes at once without having to use both levers. Especially on the racetrack, this can be super helpful for less experienced riders, since you're often overwhelmed with downshifting, front brake, rear brake, managing brake pressure. This system simplifies that. When you pull the front brake, it also activates the rear brake. That alone wouldn't be groundbreaking. What really makes a difference is this. When you start tipping into a corner and fully release the brake lever, the rear brake stays active for a bit, and that's important for the rider. When you're trying to enter a corner fast and still carry a bit of overspeed, you want to reduce speed as you lean in. But the more lean angle you have, the less braking force you can apply. This system keeps braking at the rear even after you've released the lever, helping you continue to decelerate all the way to the apex. That's classic superbike behavior, diving into tight corners fast and being able to open the throttle early on exit. It's a really neat feature that's now available to everyday riders too. On the racetrack, we used to solve this with a thumb brake. You might have heard of that. Picture this, you're leaned over in a right-hand corner and you can't reach the rear brake with your foot. That's why we had thumb brakes on the left side, so you could operate the rear brake with your thumb and achieve the same braking strategy. This new ECBS function now gives regular riders the ability to corner like the pros. Next up is a major topic these days, electronics. Every bike has to have them now. It's just expected. Ducati has made several refinements here too. They're using a large 6.9-inch display so that all the info modern bikes can capture is also clearly presented to the rider. Thanks to the display's width, you can see all the rider aids listed on the right side. And most importantly, you can see exactly when they activate. If a system is intervening, you'll see it blinking on the screen and you'll know which one is currently doing its job. That's a huge help, especially since we've got so many rider aids on board now. Without this, it'd be hard to tell which one is kicking in. It's even better if you combine all of this with data recording. Then you can analyze everything afterwards in where each system activated and how you can work with that feedback. I won't go into detail on every rider aid because we've got everything you could possibly need. You can't always tell exactly which system is active. But the cool part is you can adjust the intervention level of each one. And that's where this visualization helps a lot. It lets you pinpoint exactly which one was too intrusive. Was it the wheelie control, the slide control, or the traction control? This tool makes it way easier to figure that out. One last change worth mentioning is the shift sensor. Normally, quickshifters rely on a force sensor in the shift linkage, but Ducati has gone a different route. They're no longer using force sensors. No, instead, they're using a position sensor that monitors where the shift drum is and whether the rider intends to shift. Everything is managed by tracking the position of the gear drum and then executing the shift accordingly. The only thing that's still missing here is that the quickshifter doesn't yet work in all directions under all conditions. So with many other bikes, it's already more or less standard that you can even shift down a gear during acceleration phases. That's not possible here yet, but it probably just needs a software update because it doesn't really require much. It's just an electronic adjustment, really. I'm sure it'll be coming very soon. And then we'll also have that feature available on the Ducati. With an engine putting out 216 horsepower, the question naturally comes up, can you even ride this thing sensibly on the road anymore? It was, of course, developed first and foremost for high peak performance and extremely high revs, so you can expect serious performance on the racetrack. But things look a bit different on the road. On the street, what we want is torque from down low. These 216 horsepower are fundamentally quite hard to make use of, especially in the lower gears. In the higher gears, it becomes almost irrelevant because we are already well beyond anything reasonable in terms of speed. I tested it out. First gear now goes up to 160 kilometers per hour. So you can imagine if you want to try out the upper rev range on the road, you pretty much can't anymore because you'd be going way past what's acceptable. Maybe on the Autobahn in Germany, you can still give it a bit of free rein, but even that's becoming more and more restricted. So yeah, 216 horsepower sounds amazing, but on the road, it's pretty tough to actually use it. They obviously tried to make the engine characteristics as race-oriented as possible, which is why first gear is geared really long. On the track, the goal is to have as many gears available as possible. And especially on racetracks with tighter corners, you want to be able to use first gear as well. But that only works if it's not geared too short. That's why race spec gearboxes or motors optimized for racing tend to have a long first gear. But that's exactly what becomes a downside on the street. Like I said, it runs at extremely low RPMs. You really notice it when you're riding through town or in regular traffic. You're running at very low revs. Even in first gear, you're sitting at about 3,000 to 4,000 RPM at most. And that makes things a bit tricky. The engine runs really smooth though, I have to say. It handles it. It's not like the V-twins from earlier Ducatis where you would need at least 3,000 to 4,000 RPM just to get the engine to run cleanly without chain lash. That's not the case here. This V4 runs clean right from the bottom. Even if it's a bit rougher in tone, there's no issue with low RPMs. You just notice that there's not really much punch down low. It only starts to build power at around 6,000 to 7,000 RPM. Up to that point, for such a high performance engine, it actually revs up pretty politely, but not in the way you'd expect from a 216 horsepower engine. It's very gentle on the throttle there. And even with the throttle wide open, it revs up to 6,000 RPM in a very controlled way, even in first gear. And then that's when the real power kicks in. It doesn't hit abruptly. It's super manageable and rideable, but you do need at least 6,000 to 7,000 RPM to get full thrust. And by then, with that long first gear, you're already at 70 to 80 kilometers per hour. So you can imagine if you want to go through a 30 kilometer per hour corner, how long it takes before the power and thrust actually come into play. And that's just a bit of a downside with this racetrack-focused engine setup when you're riding on normal roads. From 9,000 RPM and up, it really gets serious. That's when the engine enters the range it was truly built for. At that point, the thing pulls so brutally hard that you can't even fully put down the power in first gear. That's when the rider aids come in really handy. They manage that extra power really effectively. Of course, I also tried riding it with all the electronics turned off, just to see what the engine would do by itself. And even without any rider aids, it's still really manageable. You can have a lot of fun with it, especially because it gives you a lot of freedom. For those who might be a bit more cautious or even a little intimidated by those 216 horses, you can individually adjust all the intervention levels to suit your own riding style. And you've got every assistance system you could want to keep those 216 horsepower under control. Even in first gear, if you go full throttle, it'll still take off, but only as much as needed to get maximum drive. So even less experienced riders can really handle it well and have a blast doing it. What's also always important on the road, apart from the engine characteristics, is how does the whole thing actually ride and handle, especially in terms of ride comfort. For instance, on our S version here, we've got the fully adjustable Öhlins suspension of the latest generation. It's more or less controlled by the electronics. We've got adjustment motors inside, which allow you to fine-tune a standard base setup, similar to what you'd get on a conventional suspension right here. And the computer can continuously readjust this during the ride. That's something we really benefit from on the road because the adjustment range is quite wide. I can choose from preset riding modes here, leaning either toward comfort or toward sport. I tried it on the road in comfort mode, of course. And I have to say, I really liked it. Quite unusual for such a sporty bike. It actually handles pretty comfortably. In terms of suspension comfort, even when you're on really bad roads, yes, it's still definitely on the sporty side, but it still handles sharp bumps and hits surprisingly well. So you really have to say the base suspension setup with these adjustment options is something genuinely new and truly usable on the street. That earns it a definite thumbs up. When it comes to rider ergonomics, of course, a sport bike is still very much on the sporty side. You notice the very forward-leaning riding position, which, yes, gives you great wind protection at high speeds, but that does come at the expense of comfort. Naturally, there's more weight on your wrists, and you'll start to feel that over time when you're out riding. And especially in city traffic, when it gets tight or stop and go, you end up having to work the clutch quite a bit. So that means not only are your wrists getting stressed, but also your left hand from working the clutch constantly. That makes longer stretches a bit more demanding. That said, the basic layout of the bike isn't totally wrong for road use either. You just have to expect a few compromises. Like we may have mentioned earlier, at least the knee angle on this bike isn't too extreme. That has the advantage that when you're just cruising along, the knee bend isn't too aggressive. And even though the overall riding posture is sporty, like we said, it's still quite doable for road riding. All the other improvements that have been made to the new Panigale, like the revised chassis flex, the new aerodynamics and so on, we honestly don't notice much of that on the road. You have to be honest here. On public roads, you're usually not riding the bike at the limit. The speeds required to really push it that far are just too high. So those attributes which mainly aim to improve behavior at the limit or to extend the performance envelope are hardly noticeable on the street. For that, we really need to head to the racetrack, where you can properly push the limits at higher speeds and evaluate how everything performs. That goes for the brakes as well. These are clearly designed for racing use, so naturally they have no problem at all handling street demands. But again, to really explore the limits and get the most out of them, we need to be on track. That said, even under light loads, at low temperatures, for example, the braking system still works really well. It's nicely controllable and already delivers solid braking power even without a ton of pressure. So that's a quick overview of our impressions of the new Panigale on public roads. But now things are about to get serious. We're on our way to the Slovakia ring. That's where we'll really see what all these improvements, by which were actually designed for the performance limit, can actually do and how the bike handles out there. And that info is coming up next. Let's start again with the engine. There haven't been too many updates in that area. What we've got here is a very potent power plant, as mentioned, with 216 horsepower. It's a V4 engine that has a relatively narrow layout, which in turn contributes to an overall slim bike design. And of course, when you're riding this machine on the racetrack, that really works to your advantage. You get a very tight knee grip and a compact leg position from the side, and that gives you a bike that's easy to handle and steer. The engine is more or less designed for the racetrack in every respect, and you can really tell it revs up extremely high and up to 15,000 RPM, and that gives you a very broad usable power band. From 8,000 up to 15,000 revs, it really comes alive. And basically all the way to the limiter, you've got about 200 horsepower available with a peak output of 216 horsepower. That results in massive acceleration. The engine also runs quite smoothly as you don't really feel any harsh vibrations. The overall character still feels raw and punchy though. In the lower revs, like we already noticed out on the road, it can feel a bit rough. But out here on the racetrack, you don't notice that at all. And it's not really relevant either. What you want here is that sporty character, exactly the kind of power delivery the Panigale engine gives you. Where we did notice more updates and new features that really came through on the Slovakia ring was in the electronics. The electronics have just gotten better and better over the years and have continued to evolve. Of course, we've got all the rider aids you could need. There's a very wide range of settings available. And what's really nice is that all of these systems are displayed very clearly and intuitively. We've got a really wide 6.9-inch display, and that makes a huge difference when it comes to visualizing each individual riding aid. Out on the racetrack, if the rider has a brief moment to shift focus from the track to the display, you can actually see which system is intervening. So is it the wheelie control, the slide control, the traction control? And if you notice that one of those systems is stepping in too early, you can go in and fine-tune that particular setting to improve your performance even further. The control algorithms and the quality of the interventions have also become really good by now. You've always got the confidence that the rider aids are there in the background, keeping an eye on things, and you can still push for really fast lap times. Also in combination with the progressively deactivatable ABS, where you can disable rear wheel lift detection and even deactivate rear ABS entirely, that allows for maximum braking performance. You could even say it performs like a proper race setup, including a bit of rear end sliding under braking. And not only is that fun, but in some situations it actually helps when you're pushing for faster lap times. One of the new features that's been introduced and that we now find here is the new ECBS system. That's the electronically controlled combined braking system where, for example, when you operate the front brake lever, the rear brake is also applied in coordination. I tested that extensively for you today, including the difference when the system is completely deactivated, just to explore the fine nuances. And you can genuinely feel a performance boost. The biggest difference I noticed was during straight line braking, right up to the corner entry. What really helps here is that the additional braking force at the rear helps keep the bike a bit more stable, especially in that initial moment when you first grab the brakes, when the bike would otherwise tend to squirm or get into a bit of a wobble. This added braking force at the rear has a stabilizing effect. Only when you overdo it and the rear wheel starts to come fully off the ground, well, at that point, of course, the system can't really help anymore. But as long as there's still contact with the rear tire, that extra pull and resistance from the back really helps to keep the bike nicely stable. The algorithm is also set up so that even when you let go of the front brake, the rear brake stays engaged a bit longer, and that supports the initial part of corner entry. You do notice it a bit, although for me personally it could go even a little further. As I roll toward the apex of the turn, I don't feel much additional braking from the rear anymore. So for my taste, the system could actually hold on to the rear brake just a bit longer. It does already delay a bit after I release the front brake, but that delay could be extended even more, in my opinion. So just to allow for a little more momentum going into the turn and to help get the lean angle needed to accelerate out again early. So yeah, overall, the braking performance has definitely been improved a bit more. And especially for those who are not yet super experienced with the bike and are always looking for a bit more stability, which is completely understandable because a stable bike always gives you more confidence, this system really helps. And for those who don't like it, you can also deactivate it separately in the background. That's a fantastic feature because it means you can really customize the bike at the limit to suit your own riding skill and preferences. The next big area where there have been changes, and very visible changes too, is with the swing arm and the chassis. They've made adjustments here to achieve different levels of stiffness. And that's exactly the kind of thing that shows its strength on the racetrack. That's where we're pushing the bike to its absolute limits and where it's all about getting just a bit more flex at extreme lean angles. I have to say, with standard tires, the difference won't be that big or super noticeable. But if you're running proper racing tires with a lot of grip reserves, tires that allow you to carry really high lean angles, then this setup genuinely helps calm the bike down a bit more, especially in those acceleration phases when you're driving out of the corner over slight bumps in the surface, where the bike often starts to feel a bit squishy. This revised stiffness setup helps smooth that out and keeps the bike more composed. The side benefit of this whole setup is that you can also improve grip at the rear, because the rear tire, especially in those situations, is better able to follow the road surface. And that's a huge benefit. It's not just that the bike stays more stable, but also that traction and rear end grip stay at a really high level, and the tire maintains its performance over a longer period. What's also been changed is the aerodynamics. Like we've seen in recent years, they've put a lot of time into making improvements here as well. We've got new and further optimized winglets that not only generate a lot of downforce, but also keep drag to a minimum. Because one thing is clear, the more downforce and wing area you create, the more drag you're going to have. So it's always a bit of a balancing act, and that's exactly what they've worked on again here. And you really feel that here at the Slovakia ring, because we've got a few crests that you take at around 200 kilometers per hour. And for those of you who've ridden this track before, you know what it's like. You're fighting with the front wheel lifting, and that's exactly where the aero really proves its worth. It gives you that bit of help. We know that up to about 120 or 130 kilometers per hour, the effect is fairly minimal and can almost be ignored. But right here at these speeds, going over these crests at well over 200, being able to stay fully on the gas without having to roll off even slightly, that definitely gives you a clear time advantage. And the aerodynamics really help you do that. Combined with the counter-rotating crankshaft, which shifts the engine's torque resistance forward, this setup allows you to really translate all of those 216 horsepower into proper forward momentum. They've also made some changes to the suspension. We still have Öhlins components installed on the S version, like the one we're riding here. They're electronically adjustable and also controlled by the ECU in terms of damping. That can happen in automatic mode or also in fixed mode. Now, since many of you will probably be riding in the automated mode because it offers a lot of convenience, not so much in terms of ride comfort, but in terms of setup comfort, you just don't have to think about it anymore. How much compression or rebound should I dial in, front or rear? No need to worry. You just select, I'm on the racetrack and I'd like the computer to adjust things as well as possible for every situation. And that's exactly what I went with here. We have pre-configured automatic modes like track 1 and track 2, which provide us with different bass damping settings. And I tried both. The softer of the two is definitely better for the slower, more relaxed rider on the track. It gives a bit more confidence because the suspension isn't pushed to its limits. For them, that's a really good setup. Whereas for the really fast riders, the track 1 setting with its slightly firmer damping base delivers noticeably more performance. The only thing to mention is if you're on a racetrack with a lot of bumps, even the faster riders among you might actually get along better with the track 2 base setting. So definitely no issues using it on track. The performance is really solid now, including the control algorithms behind it. You can ride fast and it still doesn't feel unsettled or harsh. I have to say it's been well tuned. Track 1 or track 2, try them out. Both are perfectly suitable for high performance. While we're talking about handling on the racetrack, let's touch on the base geometry of the bike. What we have here is fundamentally a very stable setup. In every situation, you have enough stability to build real confidence in the bike. The handling is still really well done. It corners nicely, though honestly, I would like just a bit more willingness to turn when leaned over. But that's probably because we were riding with standard settings and there's still room to play with the balance of the bike, especially shifting it a bit more toward the front wheel. That helps you hold tighter lines through the apex. You can easily do that here. There's quite a bit of preload built into the front fork from the factory. If you're not too heavy, you can reduce it by 4 or 5 turns without any problem. That makes the bike even more agile and helps it turn in tighter. You can really feel that a lot of development went into this bike with track use in mind, especially with big size racing tires. That's a huge benefit if you plan to use the bike on track. Just fitting those big size tires shifts the geometry a bit to make the bike turn in better. It also gives you more flexibility with lean angle. You can pull tighter lines without changing the base geometry. So for those of you who want a more nimble feel, I definitely recommend trying the big size tires. We're running the Pirelli Supercorsa SB here in the 4th generation, also with a larger cross section at the rear, and that really helps the bike hold a tighter line. So that's definitely a tip if you want to experiment. Those big size dimensions from Pirelli really help the bike carry more energy and agility through lean angles. One last little tip. If you do want to experiment with tire sizes and dimensions, don't forget to recalibrate the bike's electronics for the new diameters. The whole system is extremely dependent on the rolling circumference. It's super important to let the ECU know when you've changed that. And with Ducati, that's really easy to do. You just switch into calibration mode and then ride steadily in second gear at around 50 kilometers per hour for a few seconds. Then the system learns the new parameters and automatically adjusts everything. You'll avoid any issues with the control algorithms, and even the quickshifter benefits from the recalibration. So that's about it. We've wrapped up 2 full test days. We spent a lot of time on the racetrack today, but we also did a fair bit of riding on public roads. And I have to say, the new Panigale works just fine on the street. Sure, with some compromises, it's clearly built for track performance, as you've seen. And the long first gear isn't always ideal on the road, but out here on the racetrack, it performs incredibly well. Even in the tighter corners you'll find here at the Slovakia ring, we were able to use first gear. That's a huge advantage because the gear ratios between first and second and the rest are tighter. That means you can keep the engine in its optimal performance window more easily and get maximum drive out of every corner. I have to say, I really enjoyed riding it on the road too. Now, whether you'd want to take it on a long tour from an ergonomics standpoint, that's up for debate. But the performance is definitely there, and on track, it's just insanely fun. So yeah, I had 2 really great days. I hope you enjoyed the review and the test of the Panigale. I hope it was fun for you and that you picked up some interesting insights along the way. If you liked it, please give us a thumbs up. I always appreciate reading your kind comments down below. I do read them, even if I don't always have time to reply. Thanks again for all the great positive feedback. Sending best wishes from the Slovakia ring, and I'm looking forward to the next test where we'll see each other again, of course, right here on 1000 PS.